So good morning. Great. Good morning, everybody, and one second here. Welcome to our fourth citywide Faith and Welcoming Communities Forum for 2022. This year's theme is community engagement and collective well-being. That's strengthening partnerships between faith groups and newcomer settlement organizations, as well as local communities. So happy to have all of you joining us this morning. I know we have quite a majority of the people who signed up for the session today already online, and I imagine more will be joining us during the opening remarks. So just a bit of housekeeping for everybody as we're waiting for more people to join us online. We know that the last couple of years with COVID has been tough, and we've all been doing these virtual meetings and virtual forums. And we know that this is somewhat fatiguing a lot of us and a little bit exhausting, but really glad that everybody is here to join us for the next few hours to have some wonderful conversations and exchange some knowledge today. We do ask that everybody please remain muted unless you're speaking. So there will be an opportunity for Q&As after and during some of the sessions. So please observe the mute function on your screen. And also you'll notice that there is a live transcript that's been enabled, and it is writing out exactly what I'm saying. I can watch it on the screen. It's a phenomenal feature. So anyone who requires that transcript is there for your viewing. Also for the audience Q&As, we have a little bit of a process here to coordinate a little bit of, we anticipate a number of questions coming in from all of you who are attending today. Please submit your questions in the chat function. And of course, please use the raise the hand function during the audience Q&A, and we'll do our best to moderate all the hands that have come up. And hopefully we'll get to all the questions that come up during all the different sessions. Please note as well that the forum is being recorded, and we're doing this, of course, to be able to share with all of the attendees after the conclusion of our forum today. And we do ask you at the end of the session as well to fill out the evaluation form to let us know how we did today, how you enjoyed the forum, but even more importantly, if there's anything you want us to improve on and to do better for next time. So as a part of wrapping up the housekeepings, we'll move into the land acknowledgement before we go any further. We can bring that on the screen for everyone to view as I'm reading that. There we go. So we would like to begin our session by acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. We acknowledge that the land on which we are situated is the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13. This territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, settlers, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Now, the Toronto North LIP is committed to advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in the work we do, specifically in the settlement sector. Through continued learning, engagement, and collaboration, we strive to build more meaningful partnerships between Indigenous and newcomer communities for generations to come. Wonderful. So next slide here, we're going to look at a little bit of the overview for our forum today. We have a wonderful program that's been pulled together. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to be kicking things off in a few minutes with a great panel discussion, and I'll be introducing our panelists that we have representing various service provider organizations as well as faith communities, and they're going to be helping to have a little bit of a conversation about community engagement and community well-being, really focusing a lot on the strengthening of partnerships between faith groups and newcomer settlement organizations, as well as local communities. Then we're going to have a bit of a session where we're going to have an online information table. It will also double as a little bit of a break at 11:25. So we are going to have a bit of a long first session for an hour and 20 minutes. We're going to have a good session for Q&As. But then we're going to go into about a 15-minute session there. And then we're going to have some concurrent workshops following the break, 3 workshops, which you all should have signed up. And so you'll be broken up into those separate rooms by our tech staff who are going to move you to the appropriate workshop space. If you want to make any changes, please let us know. So we can definitely accommodate you. And we're going to have one workshop that's going to be talking about community engagement with faith groups and service provider organizations, specifically around and during the pandemic. The second workshop will be around refugee support. And the third workshop is really positing a question that the group is going to try to answer, which is, where are we now in terms of faith and settlement partnerships? And that will be facilitated by the People's Church and Tyndale University. So without further ado, then we're all going to come back at the end. We're going to regroup a little bit and have some sense of what everybody talked about in the workshops, and then some closing remarks and wrapping up, getting us out of here by 1 p.m. Today. Great. So one of the big pieces here as we move into the first panel discussion, I think one of the pieces that stands out for me is, 1 second here, how we look at our work. And before I get into the panel piece, I just want to share a little bit. I think one of the stories that came to my mind in preparing for today's session is one that I heard a little while back ago, and it's apparently a true story. Happened in Minnesota, in the States, and during the cold winter. Many of you know it gets pretty cold in Minnesota, just like around here. And there was a true story, and I've heard this story, and I thought it was very pertinent for this morning's conversation. Let me know if you heard this, but there was a gentleman who was running for a train, and he was carrying a pair of gloves, being that it's cold out there in Minnesota. And he dropped one of the gloves on the train platform as he was running, but he didn't notice. He didn't notice he dropped one of his gloves. How often this happens to so many of us, right? We lose something. And then later on, when he's inside the train and he's sitting by the window, he looks outside and he realizes that he's just got one of his gloves, the left one, right? But the train's already starting to pull out of the station, and he looks and he sees the other glove sitting there on the platform. So what does he do? He opens the window and he drops the glove onto the platform. Why does he do this? Because he figures whoever finds the first glove can just have the pair, right? So it's a really great example here. I mean, we can reflect on that story probably for a little while. But I think that, sometimes, and especially with all the COVID pandemic we've experienced, we experience challenges, we experience loss. And when we think about collective well-being, which is one of the key themes for today, collective well-being, why do we look at a loss for ourselves and thinking about a solution often? How do I figure this out for me, myself, and my, right? How do I get my glove back? How do I get what I lost back? As opposed to reframing and thinking to ourselves, how does what I lost, can I give even more for the greater good, right? But there's not going to be 2 gloves going in the garbage for the separate lost and found. How do we look together and say, how can somebody benefit from this, even from my loss? Now, I think we're going to come up with some of those stories today, all related to collective well-being. And with that, we can segue into introducing our panelists for our first panel discussion, keynote panel discussion, really, for everyone to enjoy. And first up, we have Andrea Budgia. Andrea, let's pull up Andrea's bio there. Now, Andrea is the parish priest of St. Theodore's Anglican Church in Willowdale and the Anglican chaplain at the University of Toronto, a member of the Anglican Diocese Social Justice and Advocacy Committee and Poverty Reduction Subcommittee, and a board member of the Toronto Urban Native Ministry. Now, she also cooks for downtown church meal programs for unhoused people. And St. Theodore supports the Don Valley refugee resettlers and various community outreach programs throughout the year. operates a small outdoor food pantry, and is embarking on a refugee co-sponsorship with a community group. So welcome, Andrea. Good to have you on the panel. Let's go to our next panelist, bio. Great, and our next panelist here is Huda Bukhari. Huda is currently the manager of community engagement at the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture, that's the CCVT. And she has been working on and in the settlement-related field for over 20 years, which has been both a journey of growing passion and learning experience for her. Huda's work is embedded in holistic, anti-racist, and anti-oppression framework, and she believes that anyone can make a positive contribution when given the opportunity. Thanks, Huda. Wonderful bio there. And on to our third panelist. We have Lily Cheng. And Lily comes from the Neighbor Link North York, and she is the executive director. She has a passionate community. She's a passionate community advocate in the Willowdale community. She's also the founder of North York Moms, a group of over 10,000 members that provides support and information sharing for moms. She's the co-founder of We Love Willowdale, a movement that was ignited after the Yonge Street tragedy, and she sits on the leadership team of the Willowdale Church Coalition. Now, under her leadership, NeighborLink North York has expanded capacity and services to include a newly founded food bank that provides fresh and nutritious food, annual Christmas hampers for over 175 households, encouragement baskets, and grocery gift cards for over 80 single moms on Mother's Day, and youth engagement programs for an under-resourced community. Now, the motto for NeighborLink North York is Neighbors Helping Neighbors, which is demonstrated by a volunteer team of 300 members. That's a big group, Lily. So glad to have you on the panel today. Looking forward to hearing all about your experience in the area of community well-being and faith communities. Now, our fourth panelist, let's bring up Samia Hassan, who is the executive director of the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians, Casa. It is a social justice umbrella organization that advocates on behalf of individuals, groups, and organizations to meet the needs of South Asian communities. And it's committed to the elimination of all forms of discrimination from Canadian society. Now, Samia leads various projects and advocacy groups, and some of them are and include Anti-Hate Community Leaders Group to combat online hate and hate crimes in Canada, national research on gender-based violence, civic engagement campaigns, legal aid education for immigrants and refugees, health equity advocacy for racialized communities, and COVID-19 relief and vaccine engagement projects. Samia holds a Master's of Public Policy degree from the University of Toronto. Thanks, Samia. Good to have you on the panel as well. I think we've got quite a qualified, skilled, and experienced group of panelists today, and I feel it's unfortunate I won't be able to hear all about all of their experiences, but we do have some questions. Let's turn first to Huda Bukhari. Huda, thank you for being on the panel this morning. I wanted to know if you wanted to say a few more words about your organization that maybe I missed in the bio. Feel free. But I'm going to pose a question to all of the panelists just to get us going here. Is what do you see as sort of the key value or principle as we're having this discussion this morning about community engagement and community and collective well-being? What do you see, Huda, as sort of the main value or principle? How would you summarize that for us this morning that we're talking about in terms of what helps us to get closer in terms of our partnerships between faith communities and service provider organizations? Huda. You might have to unmute yourself, Huda.
I believe we have lost Huda. She's not in the participants list as of now.
Okay.
She may have had some technical difficulties, and hopefully she'll join us soon.
Not a problem. Let's turn over to Samia. Samia, I'll put you next here for that question. What would you see as some of the key value? What's a key value or principle as we engage in this work of collective well-being and partnerships?
So first of all, thank you so much, Michael, for inviting us and the whole team at LIP for this amazing conversation. I just wanted to briefly acknowledge that I'm in a different land. I'm in Victoria, BC. So I'd like to acknowledge the Lipwingen people, and also known as the Songhees, the Eskimos, and the Wasanek First Nations communities for allowing us to use their land to work, play, and enjoy here. It's 7 a.m. here, so a little bit earlier than the rest of you folks. So I apologize if I sound a little bit groggy. I had to wake up super early this morning. So in terms of some of the key values and principles, I think first and foremost for me, and in the experience that we've had working with different racialized communities, with faith communities, the first and foremost thing is trust. And I think that's the primary principle in any relationship and in any collaboration. As mentioned in my bio, we do a lot of collaboration work with the Anti-Hate Community Leaders Group, which is a group of over 40 organizations and individuals across the country now, actually. And we do collective work to combat hate, whether it's online or in person, hate speech, hate incidents. And so this trust that we've developed based on similar sorts of oppressions that our communities are facing, we want to work together to solve those issues. We always believe that working in collaboration, so I would say that would be a second value, that spirit of collaboration and not a spirit of competition. And as if you're in the non-for-profit sector and if you're in the service delivery sector, then you know that there sometimes is competition for funding. And when you collaborate, you look past that competition and you look to see how can we share resources and how can we, whatever, if one organization has resources and others don't, how does that organization then redistribute and reshare those resources so that we can work effectively together? So I would say, in short, two things: trust with each other and collaboration.
Wonderful, thanks, Samia. Definitely, I can see that a lot. We all know the reality of limited funding out there, and how easily it is for all of us, whether it's faith communities or nonprofit organizations, to be competitive and competing for funding. So I really appreciate you bringing up that collaboration. Of course, can't collaborate if we're afraid of each other and we don't have that trust. So thank you very much for that. Andrea, how would you describe for yourself what the key value or principle might be for our work here today?
Well, I'm going to put it in faith terms because that's what I'm representing. And that comes down to St. Theodore's sort of mission statement, part of which says that we want to become a living symbol of God's presence in the world around us. And that's not about evangelism. That's not about going out and trying to persuade people of anything, but of listening, of finding out what's already going on, of not trying to invent stuff that nobody needs, but hear what our neighbors do need, and then to provide tangible evidence of caring. Because, I don't know, Christians particularly have a long history of saying, you know, God loves you, go in peace, be well, and not doing a whole lot to help with any of that. And that's not how we see our role. We see our role as finding ways to partner with what's there, to listen, and to show care without self-interest. And that's a fight sometimes. You can imagine that we want to grow, we want people sitting in church on Sunday morning, but that is not the value, the fundamental value that we're trying to espouse. In my other work as a university chaplain, partnership is just a huge element of that, because there are at least 24 different chaplains from a variety of faith groups on campus. And we can really only achieve important justice work by working together. So that's been very inspiring for me over the last decade, seeing how much we can do when we function as a unit.
Wonderful words, Andrea. Thanks for bringing that perspective, especially from the Christian perspective or Anglican community. I know my own work and training in chaplaincy and spiritual care. I think, not just for the Christian community, but I think for many of our faith communities, we have that sort of balance that we want to do in terms of the spiritual care for people, but then also the social care and really being engaged in not just hearing about the problems that people are hearing, but really finding ways to, I think the key word used there was tangible results or tangible activities. And I think that really speaks to a lot of the work of our faith communities is balancing nicely that sort of spiritual care and social or individual personal care. I remember once reading a book, you guys can Google this if you want, Care of Persons, Care of Worlds. And I think it's on that same sort of premise, which is that if we're counseling people and hearing about their issues and their challenges in life, we have a responsibility as human beings outside of our job to advocate, to make sure that we're helping to change those systems that are causing the problems for the people whom we're providing that counseling or care. So thank you very much for that, Andrea. Very, very good to hear that. Now we're over to, let's go back to Huda. Lily, I'll leave you for last. Huda's back. I want to reintegrate her into the panel. Sorry we lost you there for a few minutes. Huda, we're just talking a little bit about what do you see as the key value or principle for the work that we're talking about this morning.
I'm terribly sorry, Michael. I couldn't hear you at the last part of your question. What's the
Not a problem. If I cut out, I do apologize. Just saying, well, what's the key value or principle for you, Huda, in terms of the work that we're talking about this morning for supporting collective well-being and partnerships with faith communities?
The key value that I take is that we get to know each other, we get to communicate with each other, and we get to help each other. That's the key value that I take from all these partnerships that we are putting together.
Wonderful, very succinct and to the point. And I think it almost summarizes a lot of what we've already been talking about. Great to hear that sort of similar theme there. We're getting to know each other a little bit more today as well. It's all about communication as well today. And hopefully we're going to take away some things that we've learned so that we can help each other moving forward outside of this forum. Thank you very much. Lily, over to you. Wrap up this question for the whole panel here. What is your key value or principle that you're reflecting on this morning?
No pressure wrapping things up, eh?
Yeah.
So actually we have, I think, three really important values in the work that we do. One is that we meet every person where they're at. And that means that we go the distance, whether it is for our staff, our volunteers, or our clients. For example, if some of our clients have very low digital literacy, so we'll do door visits and phone calls to make sure they don't miss out on events or intake opportunities. For summer staff struggling with COVID anxiety last year, we were able to find ways for them to contribute in meaningful ways virtually. So we really listen to people's stories and try to meet them where they're at. The second value that I think is so important and has really helped the mental health of my team is that we try to be a community internally so that we can authentically extend community to the people we serve. And what that means is that we spend time having long water cooler style conversations, even if it's on Zoom. We make sure that we're doing check-ins, and it's important that, it's not just an icebreaker, but actually sharing vulnerably where you're at, so that we can meaningfully support each other, because we're not just, human doings, we're human beings. So to just hold space with each other. And I think that for all of my team, we would say that working together has helped us survive this pandemic. And the last really important value for us is prayer. Prayer undergirds everything we do. We don't, like Andrea said, we don't evangelize. We don't have a hidden agenda, but I have a prayer team that meets every week, has met for the past year and a half virtually. And, you know, we've seen miracles. For example, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, we were, you know, promising to give out 75 turkeys. We had no turkeys. And within 2 weeks, suddenly we had, I think, 100 turkeys, and we were able to give turkeys to other people, not just those we were serving. So prayer also has helped us survive the pandemic, and also helps us to build that authentic community so that we can be real with the people that we're serving, and they know that we genuinely care for them and each other.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lily, so much there. I mean, talking about meeting people where they're at and just being on the ground floor, making sure that we're present, you know, in communities. And I really love the balance you have there. I know as a person of faith, you've got the full component there of making sure we're also talking about our own religious practices, how prayer or meditation helps to keep us centered, helps to keep us focused, and helps to make things happen, right? I mean, that's a whole part of our theologies, is that it's not just about the inner process for ourselves, it's also able to do some magic out there in the world. And I like talking about miracles as magic these days, but you know, and that's how we talk about it in Tibetan Buddhism, my own tradition, sort of the magic and mystery of all of that. So thank you very much for introducing that as a part of our opening question. Now let's get into a little bit more of a dialogue here. No surprise to anybody, we've been through a lot the last couple of years, and it has really thrown all of us, whether it's faith communities, service provider organizations, you name it. We've all had a whole bunch of challenges, having to regroup and rethink and reimagine how we engage each other, and also challenges of the increasing needs as a result of the pandemic for many individuals that we encounter in our work day to day. So I would like to talk a little bit about the challenges as well as the opportunities. But before we get to the opportunities, let's dive a little bit deeper into what the challenges have been. Huda, let's start with you from the CCVT, the Canadian Centre of Victims of Torture. What have you seen happening the last couple of years or the last year that have been the biggest challenge in terms of dealing with the pandemic?
Right. Well, Michael, I'd like to say that, yes, my little bio says that I am with the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture, but then I'm wearing 3 sort of hats.
Yes.
Also, I'm also on the board of an organization called the Muslim Children's Aid and Support Services. So the challenges of the clients of both agencies that I'm currently with have been that clients were isolated during this past year. Clients needed food security this past year. And the third and biggest challenge that we faced was that clients would not connect to service providers because we were all working virtually. Most of us were working virtually. And so those were some of the greatest challenges, how to connect with the clients, how to be able to reach them and gauge what it is that they needed. Those were the 3 biggest challenges that we faced. But this is from the client perspective. From the staff perspective, the challenges were also how to connect with your clients and not meet face to face because we're all working far away. And so the organization, and I won't tell you how we fixed that, but then we'll come back to the solutions later on. But those were also some of the challenges. Staff also were challenged by having to juggle virtual work with children at home and how to do the schoolwork with the children while still being on call from 9 to 5 on a weekly basis. So those were some of the challenges: how to connect with the clients, how to use the technology that the agency was able to provide them to be able to reach out to their client base.
Yeah, thank you. That's really, thank you for sharing that. I think all of us can relate with at least one or all of those points that you've mentioned. I know definitely, it's one thing for many of us who are doing more administrative work and work at our computers and working from home, but when we talk about actually the frontline services and being able to provide people, that you can't just have a virtual meeting with people and provide some of the needs that they have. And I know that your organization and many others have had to really work carefully to see how your own staff are protected, clients are protected and safe, and also being able to get the needs they have. Food security, definitely a big issue across the city and even across the country, but even more so for a conversation today in Toronto. A lot of issues with food security. Glad to hear that that was something that you all worked with that challenge. I know we're going to hear a little bit more about some of the opportunities and solutions that came out of that. But really want to thank you for sharing those. And of course, the price inflation, the costs going up has been really a huge challenge, really for everybody. The inflation has just skyrocketed. I see things every day that have doubled, in some cases tripled in cost. And for many people living on low income and fixed income, that could be a real deal breaker in terms of their own quality of living. Now, Lily, how is everything at the NeighborLink and the challenges you were experiencing? Maybe you had some similar challenges, or maybe some specific details that kind of expound a little bit on how that was for you in Willowdale.
So actually, I jumped onto the NeighborLink train in mid-pandemic. And at the time, it was actually close to shutting down. So in a way, I think the challenge of revitalizing a charity in the middle of a pandemic has been interesting, exciting, but some of the difficulties that I found is, you know, part of NeighborLink's history has always been partnerships with churches and mobilizing church volunteers. And I would say the past couple of years have really shaken the faith community in, you know, just defining what is church. Is it a Sunday service on a live stream? How do you continue building community? And so there was a turn more inwards for a lot of faith communities as they try to navigate such a difficult transition, and therefore had less bandwidth to, you know, have resources, financial or people-wise, to be serving or doing outreach. And you know, the challenge is vulnerable people who are living in poverty, you know, they didn't disappear with the pandemic. So, you know, many middle-class people, like the lockdown, okay, I can make a latte at home and just hunker down with my computer. But, you know, for NeighborLink, I think we were always trying to mitigate the risks while also trying to still meaningfully support vulnerable people, which meant that, you know, when people were most afraid, we were still, you know, going out and doing, you know, doorstep visits with people, because otherwise some of the people we visited would have no human interaction possibly for weeks. So trying to maintain that, but not necessarily having the support of a greater, you know, faith community as we had in the past, that was definitely one of the challenges. And, you know, to embark on revitalizing a charity, which includes looking for money while everyone is hunkered down, was also quite challenging.
Wow, thanks, Lily. Lots happening there for you. And, you know, I really appreciate, I think you are one representing many people who jumped into initiatives during the pandemic and really helped to look at some of these programs. Now, I have to say to you, especially in my work at the City of Toronto, and I see some of my colleagues are online at this morning. Big shout out to Rosemary Bell and others doing community development work in the city. It was a tough time. I know there was a lot of us at the city that were really scrambling to ensure that funding did not disappear. And there was a lot of efforts made by many levels of government, albeit never really enough. And that's a critique, of course, across the board, and even other funders out there, and really making sure that programs didn't just fold and collapse, because a lot of agencies were saying, you know, we can't deliver the programs, but we can't lose the money. And I have to say, a lot of creative, supportive arrangements were made in order to help ensure that funding continued and those needs that were in place for those residents were being done. Now, the whole part about the church, what is church? I think a lot of faith communities went through that, are going through that existential question of what does it mean to be a church or a temple or a community, and what does that look like if you can't get together in the same physical space? Many of those organizations, of course, depend on financial donations and other things from their members, and I know that went through a whole challenge, and moving services to online, which can be helpful, but not as necessarily as meaningful as it can be when we get together physically in the same space, which is a big no-no for most of the pandemic, and of course, a lot of risks involved in that. But really interesting to hear, the challenges there as well with the less resources, but also I heard you a little bit talk about the opportunities there, moving to supported door visits, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But thank you for sharing all of that in relation to some of the challenges. Now, Samia, how is that for you and the work at Casa? Did you see any similar challenges or anything different?
So I would just echo what Lily and Hoda has said in terms of service delivery organizations. So we are an umbrella agency and we serve organizations that serve the communities directly. So although we didn't face those challenges directly in terms of service delivery, we did get into some service delivery where we saw some gaps. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in the opportunities segment of this conversation. But I think just one challenge that I would say was unique to Casa in terms of our advocacy work was the fact that when we recognized that our communities were being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, to bring that attention to decision makers and funders and government was a huge challenge. Early on in the pandemic, we saw that our communities were being disproportionately impacted, and the data collection of infection rates didn't start until June or July of 2020. But just March, April, we were seeing it, and we so many of our members that were providing services to South Asian communities were struggling, and they needed more resources. And what happened was, because our communities were being disproportionately impacted, we started to get negative attention. And I don't know if you remember, but back in late 2020, there was a lot of media around South Asian communities, especially in Peel region, being blamed for being infected by the virus. And there was a lot of victim shaming and blaming and scapegoating going on. So really, we came together with our members and we said, we can't let this dialogue and this kind of narrative float around about our communities because it's untrue. And we started to put counter stories out in the media about some of the systemic and root causes of why certain communities are greater impacted by the virus, and not because they're not following protocols or they're not following regulations. And as a result, we had meetings with even the Prime Minister's office, and we really pushed for more resources to be dedicated to our communities. And we had people grassroots that just were not accepting the narrative that our communities are to blame for being infected. So there was a lot of grassroots groups that started in the South Asian communities to help disperse information about COVID relief and about how to keep yourself safe. About the regulations. As we know, regulations were changing every day. And so it was hard for people that had, fluent English, reading and writing to be able to understand how the regulations were changing. But for people that had, language barriers, people that had technology barriers, as Lily spoke about, people that weren't able to access the news right away or weren't able to comprehend it in the same way that we would. It was very difficult for those people to make decisions, informed decisions. And so there was groups that were translating information, sending information to ethnic media, and ethnic media was able to produce information in ways that elderly in the community were able to understand, newcomers were able to understand, and I'm sure this parts of this happen in other communities as well that have similar barriers to South Asians. And so it was just initially the challenge of even working with the City of Toronto. just trying to get them to recognize the issues within the communities. We did a lot of vaccine engagement work. We talked about vaccine equity. I think that we had to pass this huge hill where we had to get people that were in the decision-making chair to recognize and to acknowledge the disproportionality of this virus when it comes to racialized communities. So I think that was unique to organizations that were doing advocacy work and that were doing capacity building work. But I would echo everything that Lily and Huda said in terms of what our member agencies experienced as well.
Thank you, Samia. Yeah, it's no surprise. Anyone who can easily be aware of many of the news items that I saw come up during the whole pandemic around, especially in the beginning, this disproportionate level of care. And so unfortunate that racism and discrimination reared its head during such a really traumatic situation of the pandemic. And not only the South Asian community, but many other communities as well that were sort of blamed, and I think has used the word victim shamed and blamed around the cause or the spreading of the pandemic. And of course, your organization would have been right on the front line of that, representing the South Asian community. I also wanted to acknowledge the challenge you brought up as well about the technology challenges. Many people with children at home, I can't tell you how many agencies I spoke with and their clients who really had not enough computers at home. If you had more than one child, each child needs their own computer. And that was really something that many people, I know faith communities and nonprofit organizations really rushed to try to provide that technology to support those barriers. I won't summarize all the challenges that you mentioned there, Samia, but I really appreciate the unique perspective that you've offered from the South Asian community. And finally, we'll move to Andrea. From the Anglican community perspective, I know we've been talking a little bit about the impact on faith communities, and even in the chat, Kyla Bahar shared that, even for faith communities that are required to meet face-to-face, it's actually a requirement of some of our traditions, and moving to virtual is not really even an alternative or a really good option. But tell us a little bit about your experience with your community, Andrea, and what were some of the key challenges that you all faced?
Well, it's the obvious thing, but I think in many ways our key challenge was finances. One of our renter congregations in our building didn't survive the pandemic. And it's a crass thing to say, but we depend on rents to survive, and we didn't have any for 2 years. So, we would love to be a massive supporter of NeighborLink and help Lily fund all the great things that NeighborLink is doing, but we ain't there yet. We've got people bringing in groceries to put in our little deacon's cupboard on the front lawn, and we're trying to maintain the outreach things that we've done. So at the parish level, that's just been really tough, and we're kind of edging our way back now to becoming more engaged in the neighborhood. At the diocesan kind of advocacy level, it's been really frustrating not to be able to have access to a lot of the points where we used to. We used to show up regularly at executive committee for the city and talk about poverty issues and what was missing from the city budget, and just keep trying to bring that perspective forward around decision-making processes. And that is super hard to do in an online forum. I mean, we kept trying, but it's really not nearly as effective. And just like personally, opportunities for advocacy, for a rally or a demo or making noise about some important poverty-related issue or environment or Indigenous issues, those would come up. And then I would think, yeah, but I've got to feed people on Friday night, so I can't be putting myself in the way of COVID. So I think a lot of people here will share that, having to balance personal care, not fear for your own safety, but fear for all the people you have to take care of, with the need to get out there and speak up and make a noise. Now, one really outstanding development at the Toronto Urban Native Ministry, you mentioned I'm on the board. They were working with one of the encampments right downtown, which included a lot of Indigenous folks. And for the first time, because of the pandemic, we actually got money in spite of being faith-based. That's a perennial struggle for any kind of project, to go after funding sources that are targeted to the same things you're working on, but you can't have them because you're a faith-based organization. And the pandemic broke that barrier for a little while, but now it's closing again. That door that opened in the cases that I know about anyway, that's closing again. And it's going to be an ongoing struggle, I think, to try to maintain those conversations about what faith-based organizations do and why we should be more integrated with secular organizations and government departments and so on. You can make it work at a neighborhood level sometimes, but it's a tough conversation. And there's a kind of prevailing suspicion of faith groups that we're only doing this to make converts. And I got to say, Christian church, there's a history. So we have to wear that. But at the same time, I think we need to keep working to demonstrate that we are about tangible care, and that this is a value that's completely separate from anything we might do out of self-interest. So yeah, those have been some challenges. That one is a challenge that's coming back now that some parts of the pandemic are waning. And of course, I said early on a Friday night, won't it be great when COVID is over and then all these homeless people won't need to eat anymore? Some things are just ongoing. And yeah, those are not COVID challenges. Those are just the challenges.
Yeah, no, definitely sobering to hear all of you talking about the challenges and sort of recognizing that it hasn't been an easy go for many of us involved in faith community work and service provider organizations there in caring for people. But also, as you mentioned, Andrea, quite a bit there in terms of challenges, but really a lot of faith communities. And I see many people from my time working with Ontario Multi-Faith Council and other initiatives online. Hi, I want to say hi, Elizabeth Rahman and Imam Abdul Hai Patel. I see Jack Penozo's online as well. All of you working with faith communities, I know it's been tough where, our own communities have had to sort of look at saying, how can we continue to help with people, as well as ensuring our own finances and infrastructure are in place for our own faith communities, which has really limited, in some respects, the ability to be able to help others. Let's move on to the opportunities. Let's hear some of the good news stories. I think we're all well acquainted now with the spectrum of challenges that we've all engaged in now. What are some of the opportunities? I'll go to Lily first. Lily, you guys have been doing quite a bit of great work out there, and we heard some of that in your own bio. You snuck in some of the solutions there in your bio. But Lily, what's the Neighbor Link been doing that's really been an opportunity over the last couple of years?
Well, I think the opportunity is that people wanted to participate in doing something meaningful. So while we were challenged in being able to connect with faith communities, we were able to build this 300-person volunteer network simply because people wanted, I think, the isolation, people wanted opportunities to give back. And the response has been tremendous, with Single Moms Mother's Day, having 88 sponsors, you know, last weekend we gave out over $5,500 in grocery gift cards to those 88 families. And that's just because of the outpouring of generosity. And, you know, our food distribution every month to over 125 families, that takes around 30 volunteers. And so you know, in a way, we're now going back into post-COVID world, and we're wondering what's going to happen to our volunteer network as people's social and summer calendars start to fill up. But definitely, I think the opportunity has been, you know, people realize that they want to give back and do something.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lily. Huda, what stories do you have to share of some opportunities that have come about for partnerships and working together for collective well-being? Oh, you're on mute, Huda. I don't want to lose any of what you're saying. I want to hear every word.
This virtual world.
Yes.
At the Muslim Children's Aid and Support Services, some of the opportunities we found were partnering with other organizations, partnering with Humanity, for example, to be able to provide food security to some of the clients. It was an opportunity as well for us to be able to write funding proposals and secure some funds. As COVID lockdown waned down, we had a great opportunity in enabling us to get a little bit of funding to create Simbas, which is a soccer program for children and youth in one of the parks once a week outside, where we were able to bring community together, and this has now grown. It's in its third year, so that's an opportunity as well. Getting to address the food security within the community, both CCVT and MCAS were able to come together, put together some funding proposals to Second Harvest and secure the funds. And so we were able to address those needs as well to the community. So partnering with agencies and partnering and writing proposals at this particular point was really crucial for both agencies to be able to move forward and to bring the client base together. And create that sense of community, especially our Simbas program at MCAS, that on every Saturday morning, we have a vast number of children who are playing soccer, and the parents, you know, getting together and getting food from one of our partner agencies. As well at CCBT, what we have found during this period was it was an opportunity for our volunteers to become really active. During COVID, when everything was locked down, we started getting calls from not only the committed volunteers that we'd had previously, but those that had never been at CCVT, wishing to come forward, wishing to be able to assist. And so we were able to create tutoring programs for the children via the internet. In the afternoon, we were able to put clients together with volunteers who could talk to them after hours as befrienders, as we call it at CCVT. We were able to get volunteer tutors for those clients and newcomers who've come in who wanted to get, let's say, their Ontario high school diploma. So we were able to do all those matches. Volunteers have been the backbone in assisting the agency, not only at CCBT, but also at MCAS, in coming together and providing services to the community. And so that volunteer engagement also assisted the staff, took the pressure a little bit away from the staff members, because staff well-being is tantamount to what it is that we also do in the sector. So that volunteer engagement, without them, I don't think we would have been able to survive. And opportunities, another opportunity that I'd like to bring forth as well to address the technological issues that we were facing with our client base is partnering with an agency that was able to provide refurbished, cheapish laptops and desktops to our clients. So we facilitated that process. We wrote the applications for them, and clients were able to get desktops for $60 that were delivered to their doorstep by one of the agencies that we partnered with. And then we had the volunteers come on board to help the community members know how to use the laptop. And it was done through the phone or through meeting outside and keeping far away from each other. So that really helped. So that started connecting the community to the services that we were able to provide at CCBT as well. I mean, I could go on and on and on.
You could go on, and I would love to hear all about that. Let's give a chance to a couple other panelists here on that, but wonderful to hear about all of the phenomenal initiatives that have happened to bring care and support to people. Andrea, I know we talked a little bit before this session today, but I'd love to hear you share with people some of the stories I heard about what your faith community was able to look at in terms of opportunities for collective well-being.
Well, I think on this question, it probably makes sense to talk about the Anglican diocese more widely.
Yes.
Because what of course we found was a greater awareness right across, I mean, we extend from Mississauga up to Orillia and out to Cobourg and Port Hope. So a huge diversity of demographics. But right across, we had people who'd been aware that there were needs in their communities in a kind of passive, pray for them on Sundays way, ready to engage and really anxious to do more. And we developed an outreach support network so that people who were involved in mostly outreach programs and new projects could exchange wisdom on a bi-weekly basis. And that meant that a lot of people who'd been doing frontline work for years were able to explain, basic client interaction protocols to people who were getting into things for the very first time with the best of intentions and very few clues to work with. So the awareness of need, and I don't think that awareness will go away now. I think a lot of those groups have woken up to what was happening in their communities, and they're going to stay engaged. That's going to be one of the ongoing gifts. And people who would never have dreamt of publicly taking a stand about something found themselves out defending encampments of homeless people and saying, no, this is our church property. You can't move them. They're our guests. And that I think will have life going forward. And that was a great opportunity.
Thank you,
it's
Andrea.
also been a way of drawing people who, because of their generation, had not much interest in engaging with a faith community, into looking at what was happening and saying, oh, I see, you actually care about the same things I care about. I'm not coming to church on Sunday, but I'm happy to volunteer for, what you're doing in the neighborhood. So it's opened up communication and it's broadened awareness in a way that I think will be very positive going forward.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Samia, I'll let you close off this question here around opportunities. Love to hear and have you share some of the opportunities that Casa it was engaged in.
Sure, I'll just quickly share two experiences that we had. And as I mentioned earlier, we did see some service gaps in terms of culturally appropriate specific services to South Asians, specifically South Asian seniors and precariously housed South Asians. So, and as I mentioned, we are an umbrella agency. We normally don't provide frontline services. And when we got our feet wet in terms of frontline services, we obviously needed the help. And we were very fortunate to be able to partner with some of our members and also a food bank that was a faith-based food bank in Peel region. And that food bank was already working with South Asian communities. They knew what the communities wanted. They were very much culturally appropriate in terms of what the services that they provided. The challenge that we had within that partnership was because they were, and as Andrea mentioned, because they were a faith-based organization, to convince the funder, I'm not going to name them here, but to convince the funder that their food programs weren't, there wasn't a faith component in their food programs, in their food hamper programs, and the clients weren't required to be of that faith to be able to take part in that program. So we had to share bylaws, and there was a lot of back and forth, and finally they were able to provide funds to Casa for us to partner with that faith-based organization, right? So it wasn't even that organization receiving those funds directly. So that was a barrier, but I think those conversations and to the credit of the funder, they were open to those conversations because of the challenges in the pandemic had the post for people, and even for the funders, it was difficult for them to provide the services and fulfill all the needs. So they were looking for innovative partnerships. They were looking for organizations to collaborate to be able to provide those services. The second example is we actually, like I mentioned, we saw that in our communities, people were not being able to access information in a manner that they could comprehend. Not all segments of the population, but definitely a good portion of the population. So we created a helpline for the South Asian community for people that didn't have access to a smartphone, people that didn't have access to social media. And so they were just able to call in a local number. And we had staff that could speak 6 different South Asian languages. And it was a very simple system. You select the language and the prompt would be in your language. And then you could just speak to somebody live as opposed to an automated system. And that was so helpful to seniors. And this was, we had that running for 1.5 years. We don't have it running anymore. As we saw the need kind of diminishing, which is also a good sign, but we still get people that call Casa directly and ask us like, what happened to that helpline? We just had people that called in that wanted just to speak to somebody to confirm some details, and people that were just living alone and didn't have any family connections or weren't able to get out of the house. We're just so afraid of being impacted by the pandemic, people that were immunocompromised. And they just called in and they talked to our staff in their own language. And it was just really, really empowering to see how that helps people. And somebody spoke about the mental health aspect in the chat. And really, we saw that people that were alone, that didn't have anybody else to speak with during the pandemic, they just were struggling so much, and they didn't know the right information. They didn't have access to food. They didn't have anybody to speak to, and you can't imagine being in that situation. I can't imagine being in that situation, and so they were just so grateful to be able to just call in a number, and those numbers we actually got a lot of our member agencies that were, specific, ethnic specific member agencies, like the Bangladeshi Community Services, the Punjabi Community Health Services, the Tamil community. So each of them were able to distribute that number via grocery stores and other mainstream organizations that were often visited by the South Asian community. And they were able to just call in and get their information and their questions answered. And it was just really, really good to see like a sense of relief that those individuals got. So those are the 2 opportunities, and I think really needed by the community at that time.
Wonderful summary of those opportunities, Samya. And just for the audience, I have one final question for the panelists. It'll be a short one, and then we'll be opening it up to questions from you all. So if you want to start to put your questions in the chat function, or you'll also be able to raise your hand. We'll definitely moderate that piece in a few minutes. So let's do a quick summary here. The last question, after all that we've heard in terms of the core values, principles, heard about a whole bunch of challenges, which really has been helping all of us understand better the context of the pandemic on partnerships, but also all the great opportunities. I'd like to hear from the panelists. What do you see as sort of the vision moving forward, or if you will, I may borrow one of Andrea's comments there, the ongoing gifts, if we can even think about it that way, the ongoing gifts that the pandemic has provided in terms of looking at new ways of working together for the future. Samya, I'll start with you.
I would just go back to my first point that I made about the values. And yes. I really think in the pandemic, we recognized that collaboration is key with other organizations, faith-based groups, community groups, volunteers. And we recognize that the way that the system is built in I'm like a system changes type of person, and that's what we do at our organization. Yeah. So I have to end off with this. We recognize that the system of the not-for-profit sector is built on a colonial system, and we need to change that system. And we saw that in the pandemic, that there was large organizations that have been funded with multi-million dollars collapsed and weren't able to provide to their communities. And we saw smaller grassroots organizations that really picked up. They took the responsibility, they provided the services, they didn't have, the bureaucracy or those kind of challenges that we have in larger organizations, and they just did the work. And, they already had that trust established. So really learning from that and seeing how we can change our system of the not-for-profit sector here, really looking at ethnic-based organizations, community-based organizations. How do we empower them? How do we build their capacity to do the work? Because they're doing it, it's just they don't have the resources. So how do we adequately and equitably provide resources to them? I think that is a big takeaway from this pandemic for us at Casa, and I think largely for the not-for-profit sector.
Yeah. Over to you. You're on mute. Or did we lose you?
I'm sorry, were you talking to me? Or?
No, Andrea. Andrea,
okay.
Sorry, the name wasn't clear. So I think Huda and I both heard the final vowel and we're confused.
Okay, great. Andrea, let's hear from you. What's your vision coming out of this pandemic and the opportunities that you've dealt with and challenges? What do you see moving forward?
I think coming out of what I mentioned before, a greater awareness, and it's made it easier to have conversations with people in faith communities about things like Indigenous solidarity, anti-racism, the evils of global capitalism, and to tie all those things together with our faith. The pandemic laid bare in a kind of apocalyptic way sometimes what the problems with normal were. So to be able to say from a faith perspective, we don't want to go back to normal. Normal wasn't right. Normal wasn't good. It wasn't holy. Let's find something new. Let's build. Let's build something that is better, that is more in line with how we believe God means the world to be. So that's going to be work for a long time, and there will be steps forward and steps back. But I think that's a hopeful vision for me going forward.
Thank you. Lily, what is your 1 minute vision for the future?
A 1 minute vision. So my vision and hope is that we can work together to build villages around those who are struggling. I think relationship, we've always heard relationship is more important than programs. And as Samia said, you know, it's the people who have the boots on the ground, the grassroots, the cultural groups. We are the village in a way, but we need to be able to have this village building approach be sustainable and have the proper investment in infrastructure. We're so small that, you know, we're always trying to balance that, you know, between risk and caring, right? You have to care for people. And sometimes it takes you into gray areas because we're so small. We don't have all the policies in place that need to be there. And so to find a sustainable way to build villages around single moms, around refugees, around newcomers, every person needs the support of a village to thrive.
Wonderful. Huda, you are going to wrap up this panelist questions here. Huda, what's your 1-minute vision for the future?
I mean, I am following some great panelists as well, and you've all said it. My vision is that we all collaborate with each other. My vision is to, from the point of view from the Muslim Children's Aid Society, having programming in churches, because we don't have the space, so we can collaborate in that respect. My vision is that we raise awareness, as Samia said, and as Lily said, of those grassroots organizations that have been working so very hard during this pandemic, and not only the grassroots organizations, but those smaller organizations, the charitable ones, but that haven't really done very much, but have risen to the challenge during the pandemic, to raise awareness of them and to convince the funders that, you know, you can fund them to be able to do the work, to build relationships amongst ourselves. I mean, I know that I'm going to be contacting my panelists regarding this, that, and everything, because we've had an opportunity such as this to come together, to create more meetings such as this, so that we can get to know one another, so that we know how to put everything in one basket to be able to help our larger community, be it a Muslim, Christian, a Jew, an agnostic, whatever. This is our community that we're here to help. I mean, we're all in this business to be able to do this. And that's why initially my bio said I've been in the business or in the social service providing agency business for 20 some years. We all know it doesn't pay, but we all know that we're here because we care for the communities that we serve. So let's care together and let's come together to do the work that we can. That's my vision.
Thank you for the wonderful vision. And now let's open it up. This is the Q&A for all of you who are attending today. I don't see too many questions popping up in the chat function. So if you do have a burning question, please start typing or put your hand up. I can't view all the attendees at the same time, but I think my colleagues will be helping me to identify any questions for our panelists, or if you yourself have anything you'd like to share that resonates with what you've been hearing from the panelists in your own work. Would love to hear that as well. Anybody want to start? I also want to acknowledge that in the chat, we had Rosemary Bell from the city connecting with Lily Cheng there, that the city's equity funding program was able to help provide funding for actually some of the initiative there. Thanks for that emoji there, the heart emoji, wonderful. And lots of stuff happening. I also want to share, you know, I really appreciate hearing all of the comments from the panelists. I think that we've been hearing so much that I think we can all resonate with. I think the main theme that I've been hearing is, wow, there's so many themes that have popped up in our conversation already as we're going to be launching into the next concurrent workshop soon. But there is really, you know, out of all of this chaos, and if anything from many of our faith traditions have taught us, as well as our own philosophies, for many of those of us engaged in service provider organizations and community work, we all agree that we have seen in more cases than none, especially during this pandemic, that out of chaos, there is lots of opportunity. And the main opportunity there, Samia, opportunity to change. And I think you spoke quite clearly about that. We have a chance to change systems and how they work. Everything, all the systems slowed down, you know, the political systems, economic systems, social systems, they all slowed down during the pandemic. And I know many of us really looking to see how we can use this time of stillness, if you will, and inertia that was there to sort of restart things with a different perspective, a different solution here, and really removing, as you said, not going back to the old normal, which you also refer to as the colonialist ways of doing things. Now there's a great chance for us to rebuild and reframe and do things differently. And I love hearing too as well the whole theme that we've had a chance to really break down all kinds of barriers during the pandemic. And I know that we spoke and heard a lot about the disproportionate level of care for various members of our own communities, newcomer communities and settlement communities, especially in racialized individuals and families. But really seeing, I think here, that, you know, throughout all of this pandemic, there's been this sort of move toward many, many people having to sort of reframe their own sense of looking at the world and breaking down all kinds of boundaries and senses of, I guess we talk about it often as moving toward more of this global consciousness and seeing ourselves not according to these, I call them imaginary boundaries or contrived boundaries of political boundaries and economic boundaries, and even the social boundaries. And we've been hearing a lot about that today, of how many faith communities and social service organizations have been helping to break down those barriers at the local level, regional level, and even national level, internationally. All of those barriers, I think we've made a big leap forward. Unfortunately, human beings, we do not learn easily of how to collaborate together. And I think a lot of us have seen that events like this, hopefully, will catapult our own spiritual and philosophical identities as seeing ourselves more as part of a collective community across the world, and not according to these made up, contrived boundaries that are out there. And then where is that going to lead us for greater collaboration? That was a really big theme. How else are we going to collaborate even better now, recognizing of those boundaries and barriers hopefully being destroyed and overcome. So we do have a question here in the chat function that says, are faith communities aware of the community coordination plan work between the City of Toronto and the United Way? Big initiative that I think started really right away as soon as the pandemic happened, or very shortly after. And Rosemary has also added that many faith communities have participated in donations and food security work that were funded by the City of Toronto and the United Way. So that's a little bit of information for anyone who isn't aware. And I'm sure that if you check out the community coordination plan work online, I'm sure you'll find some information there to connect with that. I'm sure those services are continuing to be provided. Am I correct there, Rosemary? Are those services continuing right now? Or has that community coordination plan wrapped up?
No, the communication coordination plan is still going with 10 geographic clusters. I co-facilitate the North York cluster, and Lily and North York Neighbor Link is there, and Rola from Willdale Community Legal Services is there. Ade that's here, Ade Warco facilitates the Newcomer cluster. We also have a Black Resilience cluster. And that work is continuing and actually evolving. We've been focusing on digital issues, mental health and equity issues. We have a Kairos blanket exercise coming up in June that Rola has helped to organize. We're also doing work with Douglas Stewart, a Confronting Anti-Black Racism consultant. But I wanted to address the issue quickly, Michael, if I could, that Andrea raised about a sense that faith communities can't access funding. And I'm actually in a meeting right now with United Way, and I'm going to raise that as part of my report back today. I know that's something that's been an ongoing issue that faith communities have raised with the city and other funders. And definitely the faith community has been a great partner in this pandemic in getting food out to people, reducing social isolation of seniors and other people that have been isolated during the pandemic. And I know that we've had several very effective partners in our North York cluster doing work with faith communities that other agencies just cannot do. You know, they've got a foot in the door in different ways and have built trust with different communities in different ways, even around things like vaccine engagement. And we have several community ambassadors that are doing vaccine engagement work 600 of them across the city of Toronto, with many different communities and faith communities that have been addressing misinformation and attempting to leverage, build trust and leverage, factual information to go to people so that they can make an informed choice around their vaccine status. Anyways, I just wanted to make sure that people knew that this process is in place and that faith communities are welcome to join in this process. Going forward, I think there's even going to be some resident group and grassroots group opportunities for more engagement that faith community groups might be able to leverage and participate in as well. So couldn't pass up the opportunity just to promote the process. I don't know if Addie has anything she wants to say about the newcomer process. We've been trying to support Ukrainian people coming in, but other types of refugees and immigrants as well, knowing that they have multiple barriers to accessing service. So our whole focus for the community coordination plan has been on supporting vulnerable communities, right? Our racialized and other vulnerable communities in Toronto. So thanks for letting me give that plug. And, the faith community, my own church, Fairbank United Church, is in conversations to change its manse into a transitional housing space for a young woman coming out of the shelter system. So there's many ways that the faith community can have a positive impact on the community, and definitely respect and engage in our work trying to move the community coordination plan forward.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Rosemary. Good to hear your voice as well and to connect with you. It's been a long time since we've seen each other face to face due to the pandemic. And thanks for all of your work that you're doing out there and letting us know about the efforts by the city. And it seems that Lily and Rolla agree. They've mentioned in the chat bunch, you're doing a great job out there. So glad to hear all that's been going well for you. Thank you for that. Any final comments, or this is your opportunity for the panelists? Any final comments or questions for them before we wrap up for the next couple sessions here? Going once, twice, and that's sold. So thank you. Please, I want to give a big thanks to our panelists, Lily, Samia, Andrea, and Huda. Thank you very much for sharing all of the your visions and challenges and opportunities. I think we've all learned lots, and it's been very helpful for us. Really glad to be on this panel and moderating the conversation with all of you. So thank you very much. Big round of applause, everybody. If you can do your little hand emojis or emoticons, and we can do that. That's great. And then we're going to segue now into our next session here, which is really about, we got about 10 minutes or so for community flyers slideshow that's going to be up on the screen. So we've received, get this, 80 flyers. Okay, you're going to see 80 flyers go through, I guess, on some kind of a slideshow here. Big thanks to Julia. I'm sorry if I pronounced your last name here at Normal. And Zarina Doherty. Hey, Zarina. Oh
Zareen, not Zarina. Sorry, Zareen.
Yeah, sorry, it's been too long, and I read the E as an A. Zareen, how you doing? Zareen Doherty from Working Women Community Center. We go way, way back. Zareen.
Absolutely.
Yes, and lots of work up there in North York that we used to do on the ground 10 plus years ago. Julia also is a placement student at Working Women Community Center under the supervision of Zareen. And Julie helped us put together an amazing video in really a short time. And so I want to thank you, Julie and Zareen, for helping with all of that. And that's what you're going to have a chance to do in the next 10 minutes. Then we're going to be moving into 3 concurrent workshops. And I did receive a text that you will all have an option to be able to select which session you'd like to join in. Maybe Isabella or someone can let you know if you can change workshops, or if you're in a workshop, you got to stay in that workshop. I imagine we'd probably want you to stay in the workshop that you select, but we'll do a bit of a run through of those when we regroup after the community flyers slideshow. So I'll turn it over to the slideshow, and we'll see all of you back here in about 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm just going to get started here and move us into our report back session, if that's okay. Isabella, I got the green light to move into the next session.
Please go ahead, Michael.
Okay, that's great. Well, we had 3 concurrent workshops. I had a chance to jump into all 3 for a few minutes for each of them, and really excited to myself to hear all of the wonderful conversations going on, and happy to hear the report back. So we'll start with, let's go in the order of the second workshop. Let's hear from the workshop on refugee support. I know that was being facilitated by Adi and Anna. Adi and Anna, do you want to let us know who will be reporting back from the outcomes of your deliberations?
We'll probably do a collaboration. We hadn't decided on a specific person. But yeah, I think just to highlight we had Natasha Rawlings, who's the Associate Director of FCJ Refugee Center, who presented about the services and programs and the history of FCJ Refugee Center. And we did discuss the importance of the relationship between settlement service providers and faith-based organizations, and really tying it back to what was discussed in the panel discussions this morning about the importance of trust and collaboration. Refugee claimants have an easy time building trust with probably faith-based organizations than institutions that they're not familiar with. But the faith-based organizations might not have the resources or the knowledge to help them with their settlement needs. Hence the importance of settlement service providers reaching out to faith-based organizations so that that referral can happen, organically, but the reciprocal relationship is also very important, where settlement service providers also would significantly benefit by partnering with faith-based organizations that can provide a part of the critical aspect of integration that many newcomers need, which is fulfilling their spiritual needs or faith-based needs that cannot be met with just providing them with housing or food security. So making that connection is a critical part of refugee supports. I think that sort of summarizes, but I'll pass it on to Anna to add other aspects of the discussion.
Yeah, wonderful. Anna, anything to add?
Yes, we had a lot of great questions, and one of the learnings that I was so grateful for Natasha for bringing up is that when we think of refugees, they're a lot different than just newcomers, because refugees are actually coming into a different country to flee a specific group of people or a group of ideologies, and somehow they may be met with the same problems here. So sometimes some refugees may prefer not to associate with the same community, so they prefer to connect with different communities. And when it was also nice to learn that some of the organizations, they do a lot of work outside just the essentials, which are like food and housing and legal aid, but they also integrate art. So there's some of the service providers that are musicians, for example, and they create events that include refugees. They address the human aspect of newcomers. And also Natasha was talking about how during the pandemic there was one of the I'm not sure if it was one of the refugees, but he was a chef and he lost his job, and to give back to the community, he actually started having cooking classes, and everyone came together around that. So it's just having the daily events, having coffee with everyone together and sharing a meal. These are some of the events and some of the actions that organizations can take, and they don't take a lot of effort to kind of connect refugees, help them rebuild their social networks, and also connect them with other resources available.
Wonderful. That's a great summary for the refugee support workshop. I heard a little bit of that as well when the moments that I joined the conversation. I have to say, really great points there. A couple that really resonate with me. Of course, the whole human aspect of the pandemic, but even most importantly, I think the reference for you that you made about many of us. I wear a couple of hats, as many people know. I work for the City of Toronto. I also am a practicing Tibetan Buddhist, involved in a lot of multi-faith dialogue and interactions and engagements over the years, and then practicing Tibetan Buddhist. So for me, I think it's really important that we recognize that people, I think you used the term around refugee, and ensuring that we understand that people are coming from countries where they may be political refugees, and being integrated into Canadian society via their home faith tradition might not be a preferred choice, and that people may, for various reasons, the abuse they're experiencing in their home country, not want to engage with the faith community. That's an important piece for us. And also, I want to make sure I make a little point as well for many service provider organizations that I know it can be daunting. I think you used some of the key words there, Abby, about building trust, and oftentimes it's hard to know who to engage in faith communities and how to engage faith communities because we tend to have a lot of rules and codes of conduct, and you don't want to break any of those. I think a lot of that is being careful to not offend faith communities and not knowing sometimes the rules. Big popular book from years ago was called Being a Perfect Stranger, and it had a whole catalog, if you will, about if you're visiting a various church or temple or synagogue, here's the rules you need to engage in before you get there. But I wanted to say to all of you, and there's many of us on the line here, Jack Pinozo and others who've done a lot of interfaith work over the years. And I can tell you right now, I think that many faith communities are very hospitable and understanding that we may not know all the rules and regulations of what to wear and what to say, and shaking of hands or not shaking of hands, although none of us are shaking hands these days. But I just want to encourage all of you to reach out to faith communities. They're very concerned about the issues that we're all engaging in. And don't worry about being a perfect stranger. Really, I think that it's about being a polite stranger, and we're all looking at approaching the work very carefully in that way. All right, so let's move on to the next update here, workshop number 1. I'd like to hear some more about the experiences of faith groups and community engagement during the pandemic, and we had some very great presentations. I got to hear a little bit from Father Hernan, and I'd love to hear a bit of an update. Who will be giving the report back for workshop 1?
I will, Lucy.
Go for it, Lucy.
And unfortunately, we didn't get to quite finish it, and it was a very engaging conversation. The one thing, well, not one thing, the biggest thing from it, that they've had a long history and they shared the same vision. So it was a collaboration between Unison Health and Community Services, North York Community House, and San Lorenzo Church. And so there's been a long history of them working together. And they talked about that during the pandemic, it provided them with many opportunities to partner. They did a lot of collective outreach. They wanted to make sure that vaccines were accessible to the communities. So they knew that, people would go to the faith groups. They were already doing quite a bit. They wanted to make sure that their outreach was creative, friendly, accessible. Father Hernan had talked about their friendship was breath and hope. There was a lot of things he had said about stepping stones, or there were strong stones. So together they were able to build a bridge and to overcome, to bring vaccines to people. Amy had talked about, the mass vaccine clinics. Well, people had to line up for hours, or even to go online, you know, to book vaccines. A lot of people in the communities were not able to do that. So they were able to help support the community members. It wasn't only about vaccines, like they had food, so fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. They were able to come together through music, and you know, they did a lot to make it like to add that personal touch. So it wasn't just go get your vaccine and whatever. They shared, Father Hernan had talked about some of his members passing due to COVID. And even, you know, some families struggled that one person wanted to get vaccinated, another person didn't want to get vaccinated. So he talked about, you know, connecting to the people through faith and health. It was a very authentic relationship. They strengthened the community. There was a lot of dedication, even you have mentioned from the doctors at Unison, and they didn't speak Spanish. They didn't speak the same languages, but yet they were still going out. And North York Community House had done the training for the vaccine ambassadors to make sure like the information got out there. So, you know, they were going out to where the people were, not just staying here, you know, because they came to realize that people couldn't, or they weren't able to access. They also had done another project on digital equity. So there were a lot of seniors that didn't have access to technology. So they were able to provide 20 Apple tablets and training to seniors so that they were able to, you know, it broke down a lot of barriers, not only for the seniors, but for the different communities to understand one another. Because a lot of times we talk about newcomers, of course, we were providing information to newcomers about the vaccinations, probably in their own language, but there were a lot of people that were still afraid to come out because they were undocumented. So they were able to help work together with these communities in the Lawrence Heights region. And I know there was a question about if they would continue such a partnership in the future and what that would look like, but they weren't able to get to that question or to answer that question. So I don't know if someone could answer. Do you, Amy, Father Hernan, or Sabrine?
Yeah, I can share a little bit. I feel like our collaboration has been very organic, and we don't sit down every month to talk. We don't do that. I just know that I haven't been calling Father Hernan. So I was the one who have not been calling you, Father Hernan, and ask how you're doing. But I think, so for Unison, when we receive resources and funding, we'll reach out to agencies to partner. But I also find it very interesting with Father Hernan that he has been the main connector. He has been bringing agencies, the hospital partners, us, niche coming together with, and to serve the communities. So I will be definitely coming to Father Hernan and see what kind of crazy ideas he will have for the coming year.
And I know just, I've been involved in the Faith Forum for many years, and he's just so, he wants to help people, you know, and you can tell he's so enthusiastic and his passion is there. So, you know, just meeting with him last week, I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like if everyone had the same empathy and willingness to share and help, and that, you know, what a great world it would be. So thank you, Father Hernan.
Thank you for the summary, and thank you again, Father Hernan, and for sharing your comments. And clearly, you've made an impression on everyone who attended that session. And I really appreciate you being genuine and authentic in all that you shared about your experiences. And last but not least, we're going to move to the workshop number 3, which was really a question. You know, where are we now in terms of faith settlement partnerships? I'll turn that over to Nelson. Nelson, let me know if any of your panelists are going to help out with this. But what was the outcome of your discussions?
Yeah, we had a really good presentation and a great discussion time. Some of the things that we were discussing was our two presenters really presented kind of two models of how faith settlement partnerships have been going on. One model was kind of a faith organization as a service hub model. And the other one was a faith organization as an equal partner model. And it was really neat to see just the aspects of how both of these models do the same thing, but in different ways. So it was just really neat to see that. And then we started speaking and really just having a discussion about some of the challenges that our partnerships have been having, as well as maybe some of the prospects and opportunities that we have. And I'm gonna ask maybe Tim to maybe speak a little bit about some of those challenges and prospects.
Sure, great. Thanks, Nelson. Thanks, Michael, as well. The short answer to your question, Michael, of where are we now is we're all over the place, right? So the two examples there were even to contrast the fact that there really are just such different models in terms of how we work together. And in the same way, the challenges are kind of all over the place too. I mean, Nestor shared a lot about levels of trust and how much trust really needs to build on both sides, whether it's faith-based groups or social service agencies and just neighborhood connections, even grassroots organizations. I mean, that level of trust needs to build over time. And it's not just an instant phone call or a quick email that all of a sudden trust is going to build. It's going to build over time. And I think I've really valued that a lot with the relationships that we've built in our community, understanding that the level of expectations is going to be different. And every group's going to be different. Someone shared in our group about that they tried to make a connection with a local church, but the local church just wasn't responding. And I think just the realization that every church community is going to be on a different journey in the same way, organizations are on a different journey in terms of level of ability or level of willingness to try to engage with partners. And so understanding that there are going to be many, many challenges, everything from different church communities being more commuter-based to being more neighborhood-based, others being large and small, the contrast between People's Church and pretty much any church in Toronto. Well, I'm teasing, but many churches are not as big as People's, but there are some very large churches as well. So knowing those size differences make a big difference. Denominational differences will have a lot to do with it too. Some are much more structured, whereas some are much more autonomous and independent. And so many factors that create challenges to say that they're all not the same. On the same level, what I would say is, maybe that wasn't talked about fully here, but we kept giving examples of churches, obviously not just Christian churches, but there's many faith-based groups that are out there that are willing and wanting to work together, but as well, not even classic, I guess, communities. They may be parachurch or parafaith. Is that a word? I don't know. Parafaith organizations that are maybe faith-based, but not a classic organization. And so how do we work around that and try to figure out what does that mean? I mean, the prospects for partnership are obviously wide. There's lots of opportunities in terms of where we are right now. And I think where we kind of ended off with was just kind of outlining that collaboration, while it's a trendy word right now, really understanding what collaboration means is part of the challenge. To know that relationship with other organizations is one thing. Competing, coexisting, communicating, and then moving all the way down the line to actually collaborating together is a really long journey. And there's so much breadth and width to what that could look like. And yet, hopefully we ended off with, that there's just so much hope and opportunity, and that if we really synergize together, there's just such a wonderful opportunity for all of our organizations to not give up on our agendas, but to figure out that we probably have a lot more in common than we realize. And so what an opportunity we could have to work together.
I love it. I love it. Much more in common than we think we do. We are all human beings, right? And so I think it does get down to that. And I really appreciate that, Timothy. Thank you. And Nelson as well for summarizing the workshop number 3. I'm also noticing that in the chat, there's some buzz here around, I missed this. I didn't hear Father Hernan sing his song. He's got apparently a song that he's written that's a couple minutes long. I'm going to suggest, just to give Father Hernan a little bit of time to prepare, I'm going to give a little bit of the closing remarks here in the summary. And I think that we'd all appreciate having the song be our sort of final presentation for today before we say goodbye to each other. So bear with me. I'll do the sort of closing remarks, and then I'll pass it over to Father Hernan to take us out of the forum today. So great. Thanks everybody really for all your participation today. We've heard some wonderful, wonderful comments about experiences, about challenges and opportunities. I think that, like many of you, I am continuing to be inspired by everything I've heard today. Times do get tough. Many of us have been fatigued throughout the last couple of years, but we are all working together to support each other. And I have to say, I didn't plan this, but I'm telling you, the universe works in mysterious ways. As I have a little story I wanted to share that was really related. I heard Lucy mention stepping stones that Father Hernan was talking about, and stones. And I just wanted to share, you know, a story called the stone soup. I don't know who has heard the story of the stone soup, but it really fits for today. You know, essentially, it's a very short story, but, you know, there's a wandering person, and he walks into a village, and he has nothing on him. He has no belongings, I should say. And he comes into the village, and he knocks on the house of a door, the door of a house. And he says to the owner, when he comes to the door, he says, "I'm a wandering traveler. Can I stay the night? And I promise you, if I stay the night, I will make for you a beautiful tasting stone soup." And the woman looks at him and thinks, "Stone soup? How can that be delicious? I have no idea what this person is talking about." And he comes she welcomes him into her home, and he asks for the big pot over the fire. And he pulls out his wallet. He opens up his wallet, and the only thing he has inside there, he reaches in, he pulls out a very tiny stone. And he says, "With this stone, I'll make a beautiful soup." The woman is amazed. She's shocked. He throws the soup into the stone, into the boiling water. And he says, "Now all I need from you is, do you by any chance have an onion?" She says, "I do have some onions. Here you go." She chops up some onions and puts them in. He goes, "Well, now I need some carrots." And she calls the neighbor. And the neighbor brings some carrots, and the neighbor puts carrots into the pot, cooks away. And he goes, "Oh, now I need some radishes." She goes, "I don't have any radishes." Oh, but the neighbor down the street's got some radishes. They throw some radishes in, and so on. They get celery, they get some chicken, they get some lamb, and from different houses, and they all put it in. And they're like, "Wow, we can't wait to try this stone soup. It sounds amazing." So they get it all cooked up, and they eat the stone soup, and they clean the whole bowl out, and all that's left at the bottom is this tiny little stone. And the wandering traveler wipes off the stone, and he puts it back in his wallet, and he prepares to leave. And everyone says to him, "We had no idea how wonderful the stone soup would taste." And he would say, "It had nothing to do with me. It was all that we did this together, and we collaborated together to put all of the ingredients together." Sometimes it takes a stone to get the momentum moving. But really, through all of our collaborations, we really make that hearty soup, right? So that's really what I hear today from everybody, from what you've been sharing. I really want to thank everybody. Really, most importantly, I want to thank any of you who have been working the front line for the last couple of years, putting yourselves at risk, staying safe while trying to help others and being sure you got all the right equipment and being safe. Really want to thank all the frontline workers. Also want to thank, oh, wow, we got lots of people here. Everybody who's helped to facilitate all of the sessions and to pull all the workshops together and to participate as panelists and really helping us to find speakers. We want to acknowledge all these people that are here on the list. And also really want to thank as well Isabella and Caitlin for really having to put all of this together. Isabella sent multiple emails. She bared most of the stress and anxiety with putting on today's event. Really want to put a big shout out there to Isabella. Thank you so much for making this happen today. It's a real honor for me to be here to host the 4th annual, and I hope to be here in the future years. And I'm putting out a wish that we will all be face-to-face this time next year, and we'll be able to have this in person at one of our wonderful community centers or faith centers or newcomer centers. Love to see that happening. So big thank you to everybody. And let's turn it over to Father Hanan. For a nice song, and then we'll say our bid farewell or adieu to all of us for a wonderful session today. Father Hernan, over to you if you want to introduce your song.
cambia lo superficial y también lo profundo, cambia el modo de pensar, cambia todo en este mundo. Y el tiempo con los años, cambia el pastor su rebaño, y así como todo cambia, que yo cambie no es extraño. Cambia el más fino brillante, de mano en mano su brillo, cambia el nido el pajarillo, cambia el sentir un amante, cambia el rumbo el caminante, aunque esto le cause daño. Y así como todo cambia, que yo cambie no es extraño. Cambia, todo cambia. Cambia, todo cambia. Cambia, todo cambia. Cambia, todo cambia. Cambia el sol de su carrera cuando la noche subsiste, cambia la planta y se viste de verde en la primavera, cambia el pelaje en la fiera y el cabello en el anciano, y así como todo cambia, que yo cambie no es extraño, pero no cambia mi amor, por más lejos que me encuentre, que recuerdo ni el dolor de mi pueblo y de mi gente, y lo que cambió ayer tendrá que cambiar mañana, así como cambio yo en esta tierra lejana. Cambia, todo cambia. Cambia, todo cambia. Cambia, todo cambia. We all are like the music. We have a beautiful souls. We are titled. Each pamphlet is different. Each of us were different. Each fate is different, but it's titled by the solidarity and love. I really discovered a new vaccine beyond the Moderna and Pfizer, which is the compassion and love which each of you have. Thank you very much for letting me to be one of the small voices from the corner of Wenderley and Dudley. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Father. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. We'll see you all soon. Sooner than later, we'll see each other again. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all. Hey, Jack. Hey,
Thank
Elizabeth.
you.
Adios.
Adios.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
A usted, gracias. Gracias.
Gracias mucho.